In this episode of Talking Shop, Grant and I welcome Dean Stallard. Dean is involved in the Web3 nomads makeup and has vast experience in the recruitment field. With over 20 years experience under his belt at some of the biggest names in the recruitment industry, Dean transitioned to Web3 recruitment, having seen the potential within the space. We chatted with him about transferable skills, making remote environments work, salaries and packages, and how he sees the development of recruitment within Web3 moving forward. Hope you enjoy. And we are live. So welcome everyone back to another episode of Talking Shop. Today I've obviously got Grant with me as per usual, and we've got Dean Stallard. And Dean is actually essentially an extension of the Web3 Nomads team in that he is basically looks after our mission critical bolt-on part of the site. And that is because Dean is basically a headhunter and recruiter, and he's had years in the game. He's worked for some of the biggest names in the industry and has recently transitioned into Web3, what he now focuses on, and we work on it together. So it seemed like a pretty obvious option to take up to get Dean on the podcast. So I don't want to kind of do too much intro for your side, Dean, because I know you can do a far better job than me, mate. But thanks for coming on. And yeah,
do you want to very happy.
Do you want to introduce yourself and kind of tell people a little bit about what you do, what you're working on, your background, and then we can kind of get into it from there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as you said, been in recruitment a long time. I feel a little bit old when I tell this story, but yeah, coming up to almost 20 years in total. I actually worked for one of the largest specialist recruitment companies for 16 long years across 4 different countries, which was, it was a great experience, right? I moved regularly and it always kept it fresh, but through that journey, I was able to work my way up into running a pretty big region in Hong Kong and South China, managing close to 200 people. But it was always a specialist recruitment focus. So I really learned the value of being an expert and being able to be completely credible with your candidates and clients. Around 2017, my head of tech recruitment at the time came bouncing in after an event. And he was like showing me his phone. He's like, this guy sent me this Bitcoin thing on my phone. I was like, give me that. What is this? So, I've always loved disruption. I've loved innovation. I get pretty bored with business as usual. So I want to see exciting new things. And that was it. Fell down the rabbit hole. Got into the industry, and I loved the idea of being in control of your own capital and your own data, basically, right? And then, I got to a point with my senior position that I just wanted to get out of corporate, so I actually went outside of recruitment for a couple of years, and then the middle of last year, in the Luna fiasco, I decided to launch my Web3 recruitment business because, tough times is a great time to get in touch with people. Not necessarily a great time to make lots of money, but it's a good time to build relationships, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been good. It's been better than I expected, but it's also, the FTX stuff really kind of threw a curveball in there that's going to probably, drag out 2023 to be a reasonably average year from a recruitment perspective, but a great year to build.
Yeah. So obviously, as with most people, it started off as like an interest in a hobby. And then, as you said, last year, with obviously you launched into the Web3 recruitment side of it around the Luna thing. But like, at what point did you sort of start to connect those dots between like figuring out that there was definitely a gap for like these recruitment, that specialist service within Web3? Because obviously it is still very much in its infancy in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was part of it. So when I decided, towards the end of 2021, when I realized, look, I wanted to get full time into the Web3 space, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was thinking, doing some sort of business advisory consulting type stuff, sales consulting. Got a little bit involved in that, but it wasn't, going to be something that I could see would scale and be really successful. And a lot of these conversations ended with, what about recruitment? What about recruitment? And when I left recruitment, I wasn't sure whether I really hated recruitment at the time or I hated my company or both, right?
Right.
And so I started to do a bit of recruiting and realized, it was the company I worked for that I didn't like so much, and recruitment was still in my blood, still
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
blood. So at the time, I did a big research piece. I mapped out all the Web3 recruitment companies globally, and I realized pretty quickly that I don't believe there's a real clear, undisputed Web3 recruitment leader right now. And I see a window of opportunity over the next 3 to 4 years where you could really build the leading undisputed Web3 recruitment company. So that's why I decided to launch. And look, I've done it, I've gone about it in a quieter way, but as you guys know, I've got a vision for a bigger plan and a different approach. And over this year, hopefully that'll come together.
Yeah. So go on, Grant.
I was just going to say, when you were kind of mapping out that business plan was, obviously you'd have seen it from a recruitment perspective, but what other glaringly obvious gaps were there in that whole kind of start to finish process with hiring applicants, recruiting talent? There's just a million and one things. And when people say crypto is like an inefficient market, you can relate that to prices, and liquidity and things like that. But across the board, it's very, very inefficient.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the kind of opportunity lies, and that's why I think there's so much opportunity out there for people to transpose what they've learned in the traditional world, what works, and then try and mold it. Obviously, it has to be a little bit different because things are done a little bit differently in this space. But just some kind of glaringly obvious gaps that need filling from doing that research.
Yeah, so when I did that research, I entered recruitment in 2004 in a regional city in Australia, and it felt very similar, right? Clients didn't really, weren't super savvy around, how recruitment companies could add value, and it was really just going on this sort of hockey curve, and really starting to expand and blow up. So once I started to look at Web3, it's a little bit more mature than that, but there's different complexities. A lot of the roles are remote. Half the team could be anonymous. The bigger companies, of course, they're probably a little bit further down the line now, and they're running like proper traditional companies. But then, as you said, I think one of the biggest things is there's been this kind of weird barrier put up with the whole sort of crypto, blockchain, Web3 industry, in terms of, there's this fear factor where people, kind of on the outside, they may want to get in, but they don't know how. And, it was created that way because it was different. But in the end, there's so many transferable skills, right? And there's this amazing talent. So there's an opportunity to become a bridge as well. But also, I do think, from my own experience, you do have to have a genuine interest, and I think you need to be. I've kind of been saying this term recently, which is like user proficient. I don't think you have to be crypto native, like being able to read code and so on and so forth. Of course, that's a massive advantage if you can, but when I'm talking to people and they're saying things like, "Oh, I've read so much about it," it's like, "Oh, great. How many transactions have you run? What chains have you bridged from?" All these different kind of user type questions, and that's where there's a big opportunity. So yeah, when I looked at it, it was like it's a really exciting time. It's very early, even though the industry's coming up to 10 years old, and there's still unbelievable amounts of growth potential.
So do you think that that's kind of the main barrier for entry then? Because one of the things that we say is that for it to keep growing, you need that kind of constant influx of outside talent, right? And those people might not necessarily be, crypto native or user proficient, whatever the term that you use there. But equally, it's like, how do we kind of keep making sure that people are moving over, even if they're not necessarily with having like an immediate passion for it, because I guess it's like any line of work. Like you wouldn't think that everybody that works in the space would need to necessarily be passionate about it to be able to do a good job. So like, how do you kind of bridge that gap, do you think?
Well, you can see it happening already, right? And I think there'll be a couple of really big education Web3 companies come out the back end of this bear market, right, as industry leaders. And you even see Binance announce, they've got this big investment in training and upskilling and helping people get knowledge around crypto, because that's all you really need. As you said, you've got to follow the talent. You want to bring the best talent into the industry, but there is a lot of barriers with this one, because it can be daunting, and you do have to have an interest. But also, once I think 99% of the people that I know that have actually, the moment they finally hit their first transaction, they're pretty much all hooked, right? Once they've got past the fear factor, and but it's still so clunky, right? The UI UX of Web3 is still very, very intimidating in many senses, and that's a barrier to bringing some of the best talent. But you see some of the bigger companies now, they're getting very smart about it, and they're going to pipeline talent, and they're going to bring waves and waves of people into the industry, I think.
I suppose even at a if you want to be a doctor, you know exactly the route that you have to kind of take to go to university, get good grades, go to medical school, all that kind of stuff, get your degree, get your doctorate. There are some universities that begin to do blockchain courses, and I know there was a kind of conglomerate in the UK, like Oxford, Cambridge, and maybe King's or somewhere like that were doing something. So you're definitely going to start seeing that come through. But I think it's a little bit more of a natural progression for someone who's more on the tech side or the developer side. But I think it's probably not even something that people would assume that they'd be able to do if they came up with, like, I don't know, business degree or mathematics degree. We're going with like a strategy role. So it's because there isn't a real clear, well-trodden path towards working in this industry because it is so young. I think it might just be completely overlooked. Like if there was a clear, defined path, I think that would kind of push people in as well. But on that, it's people coming out with those kind of degrees. You've obviously got some level of competence to get it. And as you were saying, there are 1,000,001 transferable skills. It doesn't have to be just completely technically oriented. There's business development, marketing, strategy. It's becoming even more apparent now with kind of untrained treasuries and things like that. So I just think the path hasn't been well trodden enough for people to have a clear direction. So people like to know what they're doing and how to get there. People don't necessarily like carving their own path.
Totally. And like, I give you a specific example, recruitment, for example. Like, no one previously, it's again, there's been a lot of investment in this, but before, no one went to university and was like, I'm going to be a recruiter, right? It just didn't happen. Everybody says the term fall into recruitment because that's how it happens a lot of the time. And when I was in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's a kind of unique place, right? It's quite traditional. Parents want their kids to be doctors, lawyers, bankers, accountants, right? The traditional type jobs. And when you're trying to grow a recruitment firm and grow it rapidly, it's really hard to attract talent, right? Like they get an offer from your recruitment company and go home and the parents are like, well, what is this? So we decided to go in to third year university students and do a whole sort of education and understanding what recruitment is. And then we started actually taking them on as interns a year before they would graduate, right? And have them in the business doing the job and getting a taste for it. And some of the best people we ever hired off the back end of doing that came from that program. And it really started to change the perception that this was a professional, well-paid, exciting career. And that will happen for the Web3 space as well. I also think that, it's probably a sign of where companies are at as well. The companies are still in a very early stage, and reality is, as they start to grow and expand and they need to bring in more talent, they'll have to bring in these different programs.
Yeah, it's like you said, the big names are already sort of one step ahead with that kind of thing, aren't they? And they recognize that that's the way it needs to go. And it's like anything that tends to just roll downhill. And we see it now with nomads that, a lot of these kind of the startups and stuff, you can tell that like they know that what the gaps that they're looking for are probably like quite hard to get at this stage. And so a lot of the job ads will say like, kind of preferred experience, but equally like if you've got this kind of background, then we're quite willing to have the conversation, which is a good sign. I think it can only be a good sign, I guess, really. But I was going to ask, Dean, when you talk about transferable skills and on the back of what I've just said, do you think that there are, and it might be a bit of an obvious one, but do you think that there are roles and kind of sectors within Web3 that do lend themselves better towards kind of someone who may not be from that background? And I say background, it's so young that it's hard, like not many people have a traditional Web3 background, but like without being like a dev, for example, like which jobs do you think are easier to place?
Yeah, look, I think the non-technical jobs, right? Like they're the ones that are going to be able to have a lot more transferable skills, sales, marketing, product, even product management to a degree. So yeah, there's definite opportunity, but I think with where the market is now, it would be very difficult to make a transition. Obviously, there's a flood of, you know, crypto native or crypto user proficient people in the market right now, and it is tough out there, but that will switch. And then I do, you know, like I have interviewed tons of people over the last 6 months that, you know, they were hired mainly by the big exchanges, right? But they were never really a crypto person, and they, even after 6 months, a year, they're still not quite there. So obviously now with downsizing, my question mark is, well, once they're sort of out of that company, are they going to leave the industry? And it's highly possible, right? You'll see a lot of people transition back to some sort of traditional firm.
Right, I see. Yeah.
What if you're kind of screening people, Dean? So let's say there's a real mission critical hire, and you've whittled, I don't know, 5 candidates down. What are they asking for? Because if they're perceiving that they're taking on additional risk, even though that's not the case half the time, that's a kind of common myth in the industry. What are their kind of demands that you're seeing that could be quite different to past kind of recruitments that you were placing for? Is there any kind of change in that?
Yeah, I mean, number one question is how well funded are they? What's the runway, right? Like that's a natural question, because everyone is quite worried and they are quite concerned, right? And that is the risk. You know, if you go to a project that's not as well funded as it should be, then, you know, are you going to be there long term? Maybe not. So, but I think, look, you know, I've watched a few things saying, you know, it's not quite on the employer side yet, but I think it is now, right? So the employer has, you know, jobs that they need to recruit, but they're going to have a wide range of candidate options, and I'm starting to see candidates know that, right? They're kind of like much more flexible on salary, much more open to look at different types of companies. There's not too much, you know, where people are saying, I only want this. They're saying, look, I'll consider 3 or 4 different avenues. So it's pretty flexible on the candidate side. But of course, the main thing that I get is, you know, how well financed are they, and so that they know there's some security there.
What are the challenges that you kind of face? And I know we've talked about this in different ways, but like in terms of placing candidates in Web3 and tying into the whole like anonymous sort of thing, and like your traditional recruitment background, like the whole screening aspect of it, I can imagine that is inevitably more challenging, sieving through a lot of the nonsense in Web3. Would that be accurate? Or
most of the companies now will, you know, you kind of, I don't think they would, like a properly registered company would potentially hire an anon profile, right? Yeah. So I get contacted by a lot of anon profiles who then send me their CV with all their details, right? So
yeah,
it is a unique challenge, particularly when the candidate's like, no, I want to stay anon. Yeah, I mean, I laugh with my business partner. We've had a few instances where, yeah, with those anon profiles, we're pretty sure hackers of some sort, and, you know, in some you know, certain countries, and you have some pretty interesting screening conversations where they won't turn the camera on and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it is a unique thing. It is a unique thing to Web3. But in the end, you know, there's still a big traditional recruitment part to it, right? Like, you need to see their background.
When you said there, like some people like screening calls and they won't necessarily have the camera on, what sort of roles are these people kind of putting themselves forward for, and at what sort of companies?
All tech, always tech.
Right. Yeah.
Waste tech.
Okay.
Waste tech. I had one situation where the guy didn't realize he had his camera on, and he was saying he was Japanese, and he definitely was not Japanese, and so and I lived in Japan, right? So I started to ask a few questions. Oh, okay, well, where are you from? And the story didn't add up pretty quickly.
It's funny, isn't it? And I do think, as Grant, you probably have a way stronger opinion on it or understanding of this than me, but because that is still such a massive part of I don't want to say industry, more like the culture. I do wonder, like, whether that will naturally kind of like progressively, I don't want to say die out, because again, it is always going to fundamentally be counterculture, isn't it? But like, I do wonder that as it matures more, will we just see that sort of dissipating, this whole Anon thing? I don't know. I'd be interested to know what you two think of that.
I think it'll always be around, particularly if you're not typically working in the industry, but you're just kind of navigating around the space, or if you're maybe doing the odd developer job, bug bounty job, and things like that. I think people are, and sometimes people do they definitely have the right to stay anonymous, and sometimes it can be for the right reasons as well. Like, if there was a lot more regulatory clarity around what's happening, particularly in the DeFi space, then I think people would be a little bit more forthcoming with identity and openness and things like that. But I think with the kind of regulators are kind of pushing, they're coming and they're going, like no one has a clue. But as Dean was saying, the kind of registered companies that have got all the house in order and everything, it's not an issue. It's kind of, sometimes there will be nefarious actors that are releasing these specific protocols where it's in their best interest to stay anonymous. But it's definitely, and as more people come into the industry, the weighting will definitely push towards being more open and as forthcoming with profiles and things like that. And you're starting to see it from even some of the kind of traders and things like that I've known in the space for years. Like, even the past year, they've completely just out in the open now. I think it particularly could be seen as a security risk if you're kind of flouting it around and you're a trader and things like that. But for people working in the industry, I don't think it's necessary.
Look, and I suspect, I still suspect, there's a lot that, they've got a, well, I know, I've spoken to loads of them. They've got like 20,000 followers on Twitter and an anonymous profile. And then I connect with them and they send me their details and they're on LinkedIn, and you would never know it's the same person. Right. And I don't think, I don't think that necessarily needs to go. But I think from a hiring perspective, you would want the LinkedIn profile ultimately, so you know exactly who you're getting and what you're getting. But of course, if they've got a great profile and they've built their own kind of following and community, well, that's a big value add as well. So like you said, anonymous for the right reasons, and it can be a powerful and positive tool, but unfortunately, it just gets used in a negative way too often. So I'd like to see that go for sure.
Yeah.
Was there any, and is there any now? Is there any premium for kind of salary base or equity or token equity that is, running at premium to, I know it's difficult to liken jobs that are maybe like a fintech company, for example, for like a business development role. Is there a premium paid in this industry from your perspective?
No, not necessarily. I think in a bull market, sure, everything goes crazy. That's the same whether it's Web3 or not Web3. I think now it's all, it's evened out big time. But still, look, great talent, great people. If you want the best people, you're going to have to pay. It's as simple as that. You pay for what you get a lot of the time. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think I put something up recently where this tends to happen in a down market, right, where companies will let go 3 people and hire 1 superstar back, and whether that's okay or not is up to the individual to decide on how they feel about it. But from a company perspective, that it will happen a lot, and they'll end up paying that person a lot for sure, right? So get 1 superstar in, pay them really well, give them a premium, as you said, give them equity. There's lots of opportunities for that in this market. I've seen some amazing people be let go, and they are phenomenal. So there is those opportunities. So I think whether the market's up or down, for the best of the best, you're going to pay a premium.
I think what's also interesting, just to kind of add to that as well, kind of answering my own question here as well, is if people, I know a lot of people will plan around trying to enter into, I don't know, a biotech startup or a fintech startup, and they'll take a reduced rate or a reduced salary with equity, promised equity, but unless the company's bought out or unless they go public, then you've took the risk, you took the reward. With what I tend to see in crypto is I know for a fact a lot of Binance workers will take a portion of the salary in BNB, and they'll probably get an increase on the salary because they take that. But if you're joining an early stage kind of project that actually goes the distance and they have token equity and token launch, you're gonna see those rewards a lot sooner than you would in a traditional world with equity if they get acquired or if they go public. And obviously that's a long way out from the beginning of a company. But token equity tends to be a liquid, and it will be vested, and you will see the kind of returns and have the optionality to kind of sell that equity on the market as and when through whatever means you can. So for me, that's a kind of big uptick. If I knew I was getting tokens kind of vested linearly over a year or 2 years or 3 years, and I could just choose to do what with them as I please, that's my risk, that's my reward. I can take that to the market and sell it and realize it. A little bit different in tech equity, I suppose, with you waiting for someone to acquire you or waiting to go public to kind of realize those gains. So there's that dynamic as well. Kind of see that play out an awful lot.
Yeah, I think where I see people really get rewarded in that front is if they're really bought into the mission of the company, right? So they'll be much more willing to take a lower salary, be happy to take the equity, happy to take the risk because they're bought into the mission, right? I think if they're not bought into the mission, sure, you can do the same thing and it could work out, but it's obviously a lot easier when you're fully committed and you're really behind what that company is trying to achieve. And then if it doesn't make it, that's okay. You're at least behind the mission, right? Like you tried, you went for it, it didn't work out. But as you said, the upside in those situations is phenomenal, and that is a very unique piece to Web3 for sure, 100%.
I suppose that ties into what you said at the start, isn't it? In terms of like it's sort of being integral in some ways that people have a genuine interest, because without that genuine interest, you're probably not going to be necessarily bought in if you don't even fully understand what it is that whoever you're going to work for is trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you find that the demands do change then, as far as like with everything that you two have just said, are people typically much less traditional in terms of when they come to the table saying, I want this? They will just be more fluid.
Yeah, I mean, look, anyone, again, it's, money's money, right? We all need money. We all want money. But in the end, if you had a job that was your absolute dream job and it paid 20% less than what you wanted, would you take it? And if, and of course, everyone has financial obligations. And if that 20% down still has you living comfortably, I would think 9 out of 10 people would, because it's better to be bought in and going after something that you want to do versus just taking a big chunk of money because it's a big chunk of money, right? That when things get hard in the business, and inevitably it will, that's when those people start looking out, right? So I have that conversation all the time. It's like think of it like that. If you've got this perfect job but they're a bit restricted on the budget, would you consider it? And most people are pretty flexible to that. As I said, particularly if they're really bought into the mission and the leadership that's behind that company.
Dean, are you guys looking to place people globally currently, or is that how's that process going to go?
Yeah, we've only placed remote people, actually. I don't think we've actually placed someone in a physical office yet. So we've placed people from all around the world. And this is the one thing I love about the Web3 space. These forward-thinking companies are saying, look, go and find the best talent in the world and we will work out a way to hire them, because you've got companies like Deal, right, who you know about.
Yeah.
They're absolutely smashing it, and you can just about hire someone anywhere in the world with those guys. So I love the fact, and it's a really smart move, that I've been going to traditional companies and saying, you really need to do this, right? It just opens up the talent pool, and you're talking about talent pools that are already, in a lot of cases, extremely talent short. So yeah, we've only done remote, and I'm always searching for those companies that are open to that idea, because it's good for them. Obviously, of course they need to make sure that the person's productive, but we've only had really positive feedback from the people that we've been able to put in jobs, and they love it, the client loves it, and everybody's happy. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's we talked about this with Ivan from Request Finance, and saying the difference between like remote first and like remote option companies. And Ivan was saying that he thinks that there is like a certain type of, and even though this is the way that everything tends to be moving now, that there is a sort of understanding that employees kind of come into when you are remote first, because it's not a case anymore of like you leave it at the door, because like literally, if you are working from a bedroom, it's not a case of like you leave the office anymore, is it? And do people have to have, or do they kind of naturally come into it with that understanding? Do you find that like, look, you're probably going to be on a little bit later or a bit early, but that might give you the flexibility that you want in your afternoons? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, people want the flexibility, right? You think about yourself, right? Like you want to be able to, if you want to get up early and do 4 hours, deep focused work, and then go play golf or go to the gym or play with the kids or do whatever, it's that flexibility. But I think, in that scenario, the people I talk to, they're self-starters, they're motivated, they want to do well, they've got a reputation, they want to keep their reputation. So why would they want to risk that by slacking off and not doing a good job when they've got this amazing flexible environment? So I think, gone are the days, and there's still, funny talking to, like one of my mates' wives who works in a bank. They work from home twice a week, but what that means is that at 9 a.m. she has to log into the computer that basically tracks that she's logged in and tracks her for the day, that she's done her 8-hour shift, which is fine, right? That's okay, right? But traditional companies are still probably a step behind, but in the Web3 space, there's a lot more trust. It's the whole concept's decentralized, right? So why not embrace that with talent? Let people work wherever they want to work, as long as the work is being done. The only thing, like, I love a sales floor. So, you can't replicate a sales floor in your bedroom. I mean, you could cram 3 people in there and try and make it happen. But again, still, even like recruitment sales, right? So I do it myself. As long as you're a self-starter and you're disciplined and you plan your days well and your weeks well, then there's no reason why you can't constantly be in a high performance state, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it kind of, it probably did test a lot of people, particularly over like the pandemic and things like that. But I kind of also think it primed a lot of people to really see the benefits of it. I know there's been kind of big companies that are effectively trying to force people back into the office. I know Apple spent like a couple $100 billion or something on their office, and then everyone was like, "We're not going back.
Yeah,
we want to stay in our really expensive apartment in San Francisco." But it is something you just pick up your own flow and your own kind of work habits and everything around it. There's no way on earth I'm ever going to work back in an office, even if we get Web3 nomads or blockmates off to like the races. There's no way. I'm not doing it. It just works for me, like the flexibility around it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I have to be at the opposite side of the world to where everyone is. I could be in the same town, but again, I've got that flexibility. Like, as you were saying, if people have got kids, they want to kind of take a bit of flexi time, or not there in the morning, but they're going to be there an hour on the evening. It's just that whole flexibility around it, which is Once you've had a taste of it, you don't want to go back.
Yeah, I still see a lot of value in face-to-face for strategic planning and your proper whiteboard sessions. Like I think that's still important. I think I find that very hard to do via Zoom, Teams, whatever you're using. I think the traditional companies will probably just embrace a hybrid work setup for the long term. There's obviously pockets that will be fully remote, but I think they'll have a blend for sure. And yeah, I don't know. Jury's out. I love having the flexibility, but I do. As a recruiter, you're a people person, right? So I do miss being around people and connecting with people and being able to just hit a bit of work and have some fun together, and then sort of disappear for the remote stuff. So I'll never say never to an office, but if I did, maybe only go there once a week.
Yeah, I mean, me and Mike do it now. One of the co-founders of Nomads, where we both live in Manchester, so we tend to get together probably like twice a week. And even like we have it with Grant, and he's on the other side of the world in Bali. It's like we're getting out there this summer because it's just like you want that FaceTime regardless. And like at the end of the day, like we are still human, and it's almost like a bit of a palate cleanser, isn't it, to like even have these company meetups that you see in with these remote first places. Like even if it's just like quarterly, you kind of get together and like you spend a week. And I just think that probably would set you up for months in advance as well, because there's definitely something a bit more draining about like sitting and staring at a screen and speaking to people. Like 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think the bigger challenges too, like you think about we're smaller companies, so it's easy for us. But if you're a big company with a reasonably sized leadership team, well, that leadership team their job is to develop people, inspire people, and help people grow. And it can be, of course, it can be done in this manner, but I think it is important to have those times where you are getting together, you are having FaceTime, you are getting to know the people that leading the business and ultimately leading your career and helping you with your career. So I think you'll see definitely see a lot of those type of trips, but that's why I can see the hybrid approach still being probably the most popular. So they get that FaceTime.
Yeah.
Dean, is there any glaringly obvious talent shortages or like specific areas? I know kind of the technical ones are hot property at the minute because of how little kind of Solidity developers or even proficient UI. Like what are you kind of seeing from your end?
Yeah, I mean, tech's tech. I think it's short in a lot of the areas, and it will remain candidate short for the foreseeable future. But I think that's where a year like this, there could be a really big shift. If when I say education companies, I wasn't really talking about universities, but actual companies that take the lead and start helping convert traditional developers into the Web3 space. And I think that's one of the big opportunities, because that is still probably the biggest shortage remains there. Again, like it depends on how you quantify talent short. I think crypto knowledge short is still across the board, and the more people we can upgrade their knowledge and their user ability and get them deep into the space, that's going to help drive more and more talent into the industry. So I think it's probably safe to say it's still across the board talent short. But then you have stories like someone puts a business development job up, right, and they get 200 applications. So there is pockets where there is a lot of people looking at the moment. But I think tech is always going to be a big focus for that.
Yeah, one of the ways that I'd like to draw these things to a close, and as we round this up, is I do like to ask what advice like guests would give to people. And we've talked about this separately, haven't we, Dean? If you were speaking to candidates or someone who was kind of looking at the CV on paper and saying, I know that even if they're interested in it and they say, I want to like get my foot in the door here, what would you say to them as far as kind of like a first steps, basically? Obviously it would be different depending on the role, but like how would you like go about that conversation?
I mean, if you're talking about someone that's not in the industry and wants to get in, my first thing is go and set up MetaMask, right? Like it's just a simple go and do that as step one, and then let's talk again, right? Because it's still for a normie, it's still a really tricky process, and that starts to get their head around it. YouTubing, there's tons of good content. Obviously, try to stay away from the bad content, but there's tons of good content. You can learn a lot there. So for now, I am saying to those people, like, don't expect to be able to, jump into the industry for the next 6 to 12 months. It's just the reality, right? But that gives you an opportunity to go and get yourself up to speed, do some courses, get your head around it, network, start meeting people. In the end, a lot of those people, if they meet the right people, they get an opportunity. It's pretty straightforward. So that's for them. For actual Web3, people working in Web3, again, there's still plenty of opportunity out there. Actually, it's just competitive, right? So you need to be on top of your game with your CV, making sure that you're really highlighting all the great experience that you've got and the different reasons why you've been successful in the space. But the top talent across the board, I think there's still plenty of opportunity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's great. Anything else?
If people want to find, Dean just plugged one of the videos we just recorded actually on the on the Blockmates channel.
Nice.
If you want to type in Blockmates, how to set up MetaMask in YouTube, me and Mike did a video yesterday. So by the time this comes out, that'll be on there as well, and should be followed by a whole series of extremely basic, low barrier to entry kind of videos. So get those listened to and watched, and then you might be in a greater stead if you're going to try to get your foot in the door with stuff like that. So
and like I know you say extremely basic, but I'm sure you guys have helped dozens of people get into the space, and I have. And you have those people who get it like that, and then you have those 2 or 3 people who they literally call you every 30 minutes, like, oh, what about this? Oh, this is not working, and they just it's. But again, it's worthwhile helping them get into the industry, and those type of videos are awesome. It'd be great for them, for sure.
Yeah. So the bottom line and the takeaway is educate yourself. There's a need for content. Get educated, and you'll do okay, basically.
But it's also like, the industry moves so quick, right? So even for us, like I'm constantly trying to learn and understand, and things come out, and it's amazing at the speed it moves. So then you think about these people who are trying to get in, they're so far behind the 8 ball that they don't even realize how quickly it's changing while they're trying to get in.
I think that was very, very valuable as always. So thank you, Dean, again for coming on. Loads of stuff to take away from there, and thanks for listening.
All good. That was good. Thank you, boys.
Cheers, guys.
You're welcome. See ya.